The Sesh is proud to be a sponsor of the 2021 virtual symposium put on by Iowa Soccer Association. Registration for both individuals and organizations are still available at www.iowasoccer.org. The $250 organization pass gets your entire staff, whether it be paid or volunteer, into the symposium to see this world-class lineup. Whether you're an in-state or out-of-state program, all are welcome. Club, high school, college, or any program interested in obtaining more soccer education for your staff should take advantage of this tremendous offer. Again, the Sesh is proud to be a sponsor. We will be there. We'll have a presence in this event, and we hope to see you there as well. And with that, let's move on and get to episode 12 of the Sesh. Welcome once again, episode 12 of the Sesh, powered by Cornfed Coaching FC. Johan Cruyff, Pep Guardiola, Maurizio Sarri, just some of the managers who have revolutionized the way the game's been played over the last 30, 40 years, and they've all done it with the concept of positional play and possession being paramount. In the world of coaching, lots of us say we're a possession team, but what does that mean? How do we train it? And what does it look like? Is much up for debate. Here to help us with that debate on this Friday afternoon is Gareth Smith, head coach of the men's team at Drake University. Gareth also plays a role as a technical leader here in the state of Iowa and the United States as a larger collective. Gareth, welcome to the Sesh.
Thank you for the invitation, Damien. Sue, Ross, it's a pleasure to spend some time with you today.
All right, so as Gareth said, we got Sue Barr and Ross Moffat here on the panel today. Adrian Parrish and Ian Barker have the day off. So
guys, got the A team in today, Damien.
What'd you say?
Got the A team in today.
I know, we got the A team. I had the B team in last time with well, so we had Barker and Barb, and then we had Vince Gansberg stepped in for Barker. So
nice.
So episode 12. So we'll go through real quick, Gareth. I'll give you time to think, unless you have your pick. But I will start with impactful player to wear the number 12 uniform. I'm going to throw everyone for a major loop. I'm going to go with Julio Cesar, the Brazilian goalkeeper, known for being one of the best goalkeepers in Serie A during his time at Inter Milan. I watched him play a lot. He's a left-footed shot stopper capable of making brilliant saves, had cat-like reflexes, and an incredible knack for saving PKs. Won 5 Scudetti in 7 years, Champions League. And fun fact, if you're ever out for dinner or drinks with Rich Bywater, Matty Smith, played for teams in the Brazilian Serie A, Italian Serie A, Premier League, MLS, and the Primeira Liga, the top flight of Portuguese football. So that it would be a tough one if they get into one of those competitions there. You'd win some money. So Ross, what do you got? I'll throw you out.
Damien, you were like Wikipedia there. So I'm a lot less prepared than yourself because you've just literally told me before we hit record. I'm thinking 12 just used to be the sub goalie number. I'm trying to think. Is Olivier? I think Giroud. Olivier Giroud wear 12?
Yeah, almost picked.
I'll have to take him just because he's got a gorgeous beard similar to myself. And he's actually in a rich vein of form for Chelsea. He's scoring a lot of goals. So I'll take him mostly because I can't actually think of anybody else off the top of my head that has 12. But I think that's
terrific striker, probably very underrated. So
yeah.
Sue, what do you got?
Top winner as well.
Yeah, I didn't touch that one. I struggled a little bit with the number 12. I had to look it up. So I'm going Christine Sinclair. So one thing I didn't realize is at this time last year, she just took over for the most international goals, male or female, with 186 international goals. Just to wrap your head around that, 186 international goals, and she's had 296 caps. So she's just a prolific goal scorer for Canada. She plays for the Portland Thorns. She's like the Lewandowski of just goal scoring and coaching boys and girls. For girls, I think we're always looking to get girls to get that inner drive, to get that selfish side, to not be the assist maker, but to be the playmaker and get the ball in the back of the net. So she's pretty awesome.
Love it. Gareth.
For me, I chose Thierry Henry. I know he was primarily number 14 for Arsenal, but he was 12 at Monaco, and then I believe he wore number 12 when he went back to Arsenal for his loan spell, and he wore number 12, obviously, with New York Red Bulls. So Thierry Henry was my pick.
Class. All right. Well, Gareth, I want to give you the floor so you can jump in, do the screen share, and take us through your session, and we'll let you speak, and then jump in with some questions, and then have a dialogue.
Okay. Well, I'll share just a couple of details just to give a little bit of background. I think sometimes when we jump into the practice design process, we can very quickly get into the activity and not always understand maybe the thought processes behind the activity design. So if you're okay with that, I give a few pieces that I think are important, and then we'll dig into the details. So
yeah, absolutely.
10 general things. This is probably more the educator in me, just thinking through when you start designing a training session, I think you're processing a lot of factors, and 10 key guidelines I would suggest that we use as a kind of guiding principle would be, get a clear idea of the developmental stage, because it shapes what the potential developmental needs and goals are, number 2 and 3. I think gauging within that developmental stage what level you're working with helps to shape how deep you're going to go in terms of the content or the language that you use, or the depths within the tactical concepts that you're going to try and deliver. So I'd say level of play is crucial. The length of the session is important because it frames what you can and can't do in terms of number of activities, sequencing of activities, and prioritizing what you want to do as it relates to 6, which would be your session objective. If you're trying to cover a lot and get a lot of things done, but you only have a short period of time, then you have a conflict there in some of your guiding principles. Number of players available. The interesting thing is you have a roster. You plan for a certain number, but sometimes that number changes day by day. Players pick up an injury, and the question is, are you ready to make those adjustments, or have you planned for those adjustments, potentially, if it takes place? And then field size and equipment. We sometimes, I think, brush over, assuming everybody has access to everything, but the reality is when you go around the country, sometimes you have a full-size pitch, half a pitch, quarter of a pitch, sixth of a pitch. Sometimes you're indoors, outdoors. We're about to start training here, and some days we could be on a 22 by 45 turf. That afternoon I could be on a 120 by 70, and the next day I could be inside the gym trying to figure out how we get as much out of that space. So I think the field size and the equipment has an impact. And then 2 other components, where you are in the weekly cycle, I think gives context, especially to the physical load. And then conditions and facilities, they have an impact. Right now we're in probably 17 degrees, maybe 20 degrees with snow surrounding you. I think that changes maybe some of the practice design process, or at least your interventions throughout the training session. So a couple of key details that run through our mind when we're in the practice design phase. Overarching view, I would just say that in any training session, you're trying to address certain objectives. The one I'm going to go through today would be focus more in the possession phase. On a very basic level, there's 4 moments. You can choose to address 1, 2, and you have to try and be specific when you're in your training sessions so that you can get a real clear message. So the session today, I'll focus in the possession phase with a little bit of the regain possession. When we win it, how do we build? And when we have established possession, how do we build? So that would be the space. That would be a snapshot leading into the training session. When we're talking about this in possession and building phase, ultimately you're looking at advancing not just the ball, but the team structure. And so are we trying to advance into, we reference 4 zones, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so the question for us is, are we trying to play in behind? Are we trying to play into? Are we trying to play through, or are we trying to go around them? And trying to create that clear framework for the players, I think, is important so that they understand, at least at a conceptual level, what you're trying to achieve. So for me today, the focus in the building phase would be how do we play through the opposition and advance into zone 2 and zone 3. And that has an impact on practice design, the shape and dimensions of your field, but just to give some context to that. And then this is just an overview. I'll spend more time in the building the training session, and we'll get into the nuances, the actual activity itself. I think it's key that maybe I frame what we're trying to do with the X and O's. And so training objective would be improving the team's ability to break the first line and create these attacking actions facing forward in the midfield, which we think is a key quality of a good building phase, as well as established possession. A couple of main principles underneath that would be the structure of the team to maximize space, the ability to break lines, knowing which line to break and when. Sometimes playing forward is actually an opposition decoy to create a trigger or pressure pockets. And so just because it's on to play forward doesn't mean you should. Sometimes playing forward is actually playing into the opposition's hands, resulting in turnovers and pressure. Our goal is, can you break lines and play forward at the right time when possible? And if not, can we circulate? You need the alternative. And then sub-principle would be the support from those in and around the ball and further away. And the sub-principle would be body orientation and ball circulation as it relates to speed of play. And this relates to a session from the fall in terms of a practice that we ran that we used to try and achieve these objectives. So questions on that before I dig into some of the details?
I don't have anything yet. I mean,
no, Gareth, that's fantastic. It's not so much a question, but I've been fortunate enough to do several episodes of the Sesh now, and I think the really strong episodes, what we're seeing is a trend of people recognizing, one, the context, which with your 10 points, that's basically what you're doing, is you're recognizing the context. 2, setting objectives for the session before you start building exercises. And then 3, taking a specific game moment and sort of working back from that as you build your exercises. And so I think that's the most sort of articulate packaged way we've seen those things sort of laid out. So that was not a question, but more just highlighting that.
Yeah, I think it's, and Damien, you and I talked a little bit. I think one of the challenges right now I see in coach development is we're looking for the packaged lesson plan. And the challenge with that packaged lesson plan is it's contextual. And if we don't get it right, whether that's age group, gender, level of play, I think what actually we can negatively impact the development process, because I'm superimposing somebody else's philosophy and principles into my context. Probably going to help the kids in some capacity, but I don't know if it's developmentally appropriate. So I'm just giving a little bit of framework to how we shape our training sessions. I'm going to dig in here, Damien, and I want to chat just more about that. Can you see my screen, the field?
Yeah, we have it, yeah.
So, based on our conversation, Damien, I didn't want to just put an activity up there and go, this is what we do. What I was hoping to do is maybe walk through 3 activities and show maybe a sequencing or progression, and then leave it open for you to ask questions. I think that might be a healthier way to go through this, and then you can challenge me on the critical thinking behind it. So,
yeah, love it.
So if we're working on, with the context in mind and the objective in mind, the idea is, can we build from one area of the field to the other? And can we advance possession and team structure? And one of the key kind of sub-principles would be your ability to break lines. And breaking lines is not only the ability to execute the pass to advance, but it's the player in possession's ability to recognize gaps between opposition structure. So drawing the players in possession's attention to specific cues or information in the game, I think is a critical part in layering in your objectives. So one activity we use to get the players started, but we don't put too much of a physical load on them. I'm actually going to take the numbering out of that system right now. Bear with me a second, just to... Okay, so one activity we use with the guys as a warm-up phase, and again, you'll we can go into the dimensions. As we put them in a smaller space that has less of a physical load. So this is assuming they've done their dynamic warm-up, they've had some connection with the ball, there's a technical specific activity that activates them for this session. So assume this is phase 2, if you will. One of our assistant coaches, James, he runs the preparation phase. So he would see the lesson plan and he would shape that activation and warm-up specifically for the topic. Once that's taken place, then they get handed over to the staff, if you will. And so one activity we use with our guys, like this, is we try and put them in a situation where we isolate a specific player action. You can ask questions as I do this because I don't want to feel. I know this is painful, Damien, but I thought this might be more beneficial than me just throwing up.
That's fine. If I had a really great question to ask you, I would, but I don't. So
this is one activity that we use. It's usually a 5-yard width. So the dimensions on this, are usually 5 yards in length. And then depending on the players and how big a gap we want to see in the opposition structure, teams that play loosely connected expand that space, and teams that are very compressed make it tighter. And so what we do is we have the blue teams, they play each other. So if I give this ball to the blue team, let's say the blue team have the possession in this phase here. I'm going to try and make it a little bit, I can't really zoom in too much. So the objective is these 4 players and these 4 players are one team. These 4 reds and these 4 reds are one team, and they're playing as a collective unit. The goal of the 4 here is to circulate the ball as quickly as possible in a way that it disorganizes the opposition and then find a way through to connect to the other blue team. If you can successfully break the line, you either go through them, you can go around them, or you can actually get creative and go over the line. So it's a fun game where possession unopposed in your grid, it's more about ball circulation, and then finding the moment to recognize the gap either between lines or when they're compressed or have overshifted, circulate, and then break the line by going around them. So through, around, if you can circulate quick enough, or a little creative flick over.
Gareth,
the red team, yeah, go on, Sue.
Just because we're in a phase 2 now, and you want to start bringing your goalkeeper in, you could certainly have your goalkeeper sort of directing from the back, but how would you get them involved? Or you could certainly have them, you can move a goal up past the last line of defense, but that's really not game-like. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. In this second activity, we usually have the goalkeeper with a goalkeeping coach. So the easy out to your question is, we just give them to the goalkeeping coach, Sue. That would be my easy out. The other layer of, if you don't have a goalkeeping coach and the goalkeeper's in, we've had our goalkeepers jump in this because they have to fix their feet in many levels. So the ability to be one of those players. If you have more players, we sometimes, if we're trying to manage the load, we would have a 5th team off here recovering. You play your 2.5 to 3 minutes. And then when you take that team off, you add that team in, and then the goalkeeper could rotate and as one of the team to work on the ability to receive, to break lines, to circulate. There is a way of tying them in as a ball playing goalkeeper, if you will. There is another variation to this, Sue, where, and this is why I built the 5th grid here. Sometimes we move this and we add layers to the grid, and the goalkeeper plays at the end and the goalkeeper plays at the end. And as you're trying to break the lines, as the space gets bigger, if the opposition structure is actually quite poor, you can get points from going there straight into the goalkeeper, which would be considered as playing in behind as opposed to playing through. So there are a couple of different ways you can vary this for the goalkeeper to be involved.
Gareth, I don't want to ask a question preemptively, but I will. So the blue team is the focus team right now. If the red team wins the ball, are they going red to red?
Yep, it's the exact same game for both. So if you can keep possession, and we've gone games where, the blue team successfully circulate break lines, you could go the 2 minutes and the blue team are the only team that keep it. And then you're kind of nibbling at the red team saying, if you're not going to defend properly, then you're going to get punished in terms of you won't get the ball back. The other piece that I think is important in this is if you don't fix the red team, you don't create a realistic picture for the blue team, and then it becomes too easy. So we always make it a competition. It's either who has the most lines broken within 2 minutes, or we give a certain target, first team to 5, and that adds a level of urgency and competition. And usually it looks like the blue team working hard or the red team in possession working hard to break lines, and the team who's defending with their lives, sliding, intercepting, staying tight, shifting. Not a huge physical load, it's more short intensive work in a tight space, but it's usually quite a fun competitive matchup, introducing the idea of breaking lines.
And would you, if the red team, the opposition team was not, into it for some reason, would you adopt more of an orientation type methodology with them to get them corrected, to make it more realistic, or do you kind of just let them play through it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Is your question directed towards the practice design or the actual motivation and desire of the player? Because depending on where you tie the origin of the concern, that'll dictate what I'm about to say.
Yeah, it's more just within the moment. So not necessarily within the design, but the motivation of the players within that particular session.
Yeah, I would say if the players aren't motivated to defend properly, the session would be paused and there'd be a direct conversation. At our level, that just wouldn't be acceptable. It also wouldn't be, out of question for us if the other team who's off. Let's say these two teams are competing and there's a team off. If the application, appetite, attitude, work rate, if it just isn't there, we stop the game and go, okay, you're off, next team on. You've not earned the right to be on the field. And if you don't apply yourself, which is a basic principle for us, then you can lose that opportunity and somebody else can play. It usually takes one of those and everybody's up to speed. To answer your second questions in terms of the orientation component, I think it's very easy to just communicate to the opposition, even though the emphasis would be on the blue team. It's not difficult in this space to influence the reds about stay tight, get tight, stay tight, shift. You can still influence through the course of the activity, even though your emphasis might be a little more on the blue team breaking lines.
Cool.
And you could make it even more positional by taking out a player through some of your middle zones there. I mean, you could have a back four, put the first line of red into 3.
Yep. And so I'll build on that. Here's the progression. So that's the starting point. The progression of this activity as you apply pressure is 4v0. We then allow one red player, only one at a time though, any one of those red teams, when they think they have a sniff at getting it, they can step into this zone. You can play 4v1. And so the situation we're presenting to both teams is pick your moment, identify the trigger if you're working on the defending to step and win it. And for the blue team, when they commit one into that line, recognize the gaps and the line that is exposed. So you then have to circulate and then advance through the gap because they have stepped too early or they have overcommitted or committed too early. So that's the first progression where we release one player in. It's a 4v1. Can we circulate and expose the gap that's been created? The second progression that we permit is this. Once they get the hang of the one being in there 4v1, we allow one blue player from the opposition to drop into the next zone. So pick and choose your moments to show up deeper. And we can then connect through the lines to get in here. Once they win it, they join back in. It's 4v0. That player joins in. They either have to make a choice on staying connected in terms of a tight block, or sometimes releasing a player to go and press to force the turnover. And that's the tension point that we're trying to create within the group. So.
Yeah, I love it. And this is an activity that I think a lot of us use, and sometimes I'll use it to work with defensive shape and that stuff as well. So it's an activity, one of those that you can use multiple different phases of the game, which is is good, because I think the less activities we have that we can reuse and adapt is probably better coaching. So what would you do next then within the activity? So you got all the progressions as far as people entering in zones, and you have potentially a fifth team, but so next going into some type of rondo maybe?
Yeah, so I then go positional and directional, and we also increase the distances covered and the spacing just to create a little more physical loading, if you will, to prepare for the third phase. So you go your 4v4. Usually use a 4v4 plus 3 to get that numerical advantage. So we would get in this space. I don't know why I gave my yellow card, but it's okay. So the next phase for us would be, let's get. The next phase for us would be then, and there would obviously be multiple grids set up. It's dependent on the number of players. The players would then progress into this. It's usually about a 25 by 35. So that would be your dimensions there. And you have a numerical advantage with the team in possession. So let's say the blue team is here. So you can label it as a 6, 8, and 10 with a 9 if we're advancing from this side to this side. It could be a 4 or 5 center back with 2 midfield players, and then the next line being a 9. How you want to structure that based on the functional group that you're maybe placing emphasis on, that's entirely up to you. It just depends on your objective, so it could go a couple of different ways. And then very simple activity, we usually go for about 3 minutes based on physical load, and the goal is you have to be able to play through lines. So you can't go directly from A to B. Try and capture this here. You can't go directly from A to B initially. What you have to do is you have to create a numerical advantage in the building phase. And what we're trying to do is find the free player facing forward. And it doesn't necessarily mean the neutral player. The neutral player could in theory be a decoy player showing the center back shows this player has to make a choice. So if the player chooses to close off the neutral player, there's your numerical advantage facing forward. If there's just a number of variations there. So you have the +1. The question is the +1 creating a decoy to get your certain players on the ball, or is your structure shaped so that you then can find the free player centrally? The central player is usually the tougher one to find. So you score by advancing through the lines and then connecting to the other side. As soon as you do that, you maintain possession, and you do the same going in the other direction. So that would be an activity we would use to, 1, start to get more mobility within the group, 2, increase the amount of pressure and the challenge from a decision-making perception perspective, and creating different situations that are numerical advantages while progressing towards bigger spaces.
Is there any progressions that you would use within this activity?
Say that again, Damien, sorry.
Would you progress this activity any, or are you just going to stay with this and then move on to your more expanded game?
Yeah, we tend to stay just in this space. One thing that we have been intentional on is we try not to do too many activities, because we find that sometimes the players spending a lot of time just learning the new activity and not getting into the detail of the activity. So we might play this for a 3x3 with a 2-minute recovery. So you get 3 rotations, you get 3 games. And then what we tend to do is let the first one flow until they get the gist of the activity. The second one, we bring in the principles, like play forward when possible, maximize space to create the passing lanes for us to play forward or circulate, and then try and get yourself into an attacking action facing forward so that we can play forward. So we would then, within the same activity, the progression is more in the layering of the principle and less about the adjustment of dimensions, another rule, another condition, another. So I would say the progression is more in getting deeper in the player's understanding at recognizing cues, information, and the principle itself. and not always adjusting the structure of the activity, which can disrupt the learning line, if you will. Yeah, that would be how I would form the progression.
Okay. Ross, Sue, you guys want to jump in, or?
Yeah, in terms of your teaching interventions, if you will, Gareth, you know, where you get the three-minute games. Do you tend to just layer the information between the bouts, if you will, or is at any point in this are you stepping into the picture and trying to paint a picture or freeze the game?
Yeah, I think all of the above, Ross. One thing I've been really intentional with in the last couple of years is, in my eagerness to help players get better, I've stepped in too much, and I can see that impacting the motivation of the players. And so I've tried to find different ways of how can I give you this information without disrupting the flow and taking away maybe some of the enjoyment of the flow. So I tend to try and give a little bit in the front end, let it roll, give a few details during the flow. But it wouldn't be uncommon within the 3x3 for me to step in maybe once or twice. But ideally, we're doing it in the recovery phase. So that 1.5 or 2 minutes, it's just a quick whistle. Everybody dial in. When we talk about maximizing space, here's a couple of details. When we talk about breaking lines, here's the options. Good, great. Change the teams, and then we shift on to the next rotation. So the other piece with the interventions, Ross, is it's really tied into your physical load for the day. So if you really need to manage the load, then you might be in a little bit more and just, using that as a teaching moment. But if you're trying to build the physical base and you have an objective physically, you might allow it to flow more so that you don't disrupt that. So I think there's a component there.
Yeah. Great insights that for our youth coaches listening in as well, in terms of not always feeling the need to step in or disrupt the flow, and that can actually detract some of the enjoyment. I think that those are great insights.
There's a lot of things. There's so much in this. You can do so much with it. It's really fun. Couple of practical things I like about it. First of all, you've got target players on the end. So in a lot of our environments, I think we often have a lot of players that are returning from injury that aren't ready for contact. So you can put contact players in the end. You also have a team of 4 resting, right, based on the PDI. So you would have maybe not have 2 goalies at this point, what we discussed about earlier, and then you have a team of 4 resting, because really 2 minutes is a lot of work in this activity. So you're going to be really exhausted. And then the other thing that I like is what you were saying is, looking for those triggers when we can get that central player, which is not necessarily the neutral, when we can get that central player facing forward, right? We're cooking with butter. We're looking to get forward, and you've got a great opportunity to create, have that 9 be a decoy and potentially be the player that drops in and get a rotation. So there's a lot in here.
And connecting it to your previous point as well, so I think this wouldn't be uncommon for us to pull a goalkeeper in here or 2 and use them as the target players in the building phase. So receiving back passes, playing into congested spaces. We wouldn't use them as the neutral centrally, but having them on the ends and helping them get a feel for that building phase is another aspect of tying them in.
That's great.
Move on. We good? Damien, I'm going to take your lead on this one, so you tell me. You're on mute, Damien, so I'm not sure.
Sorry, my dogs were. Yeah, I'll edit this part out. So yeah, we can move on. Yeah.
The next progression would be more. I might have need to get these picked up again. The next progression would be to go not only directional, but position specific, if you will. And so just a simple example, and I'll go with the blue team first. We would create the area of the field that we're looking to work on. So you would have this back to middle third. These would be the 2/3, maybe just slightly longer in practicality, but we would be looking to advance from back to middle third. So we create the dimensions of the field. We have the space and targets that we're looking to play into, and then start to functionally get into a place where, okay, who are we trying to help positionally, solve this problem of building back to middle third. So then establishing the structure of your building team. So you get the matchups in the space that are, I would say, game-like in many ways. I think we need to make sure we don't miss it on goalkeeper. And then you would start to build your matchups as it relates to the opposition. Okay, if we're in the building phase, the opposition are, let's change it up a little bit and go with, let's say they're playing in a 4-4-2. Let's give some examples there. Let's say the opposition's got a 2 up front. We'll say, Burnley's last approach, if you will. Because I think we always do 4-3-3. Let's say there's your opposition structure, if you will, and then I'm going to pull those guys off. They may have a 4 underneath, slightly restricted. And then just let me clean this piece up. So this would be a third activity if we wanted to get position specific, a little bit more functional. So goalkeeper, back 4, and midfield 3 versus a front 2, a flat midfield, a 4, and then I've put 1 centre back in there who would be toggled a little bit to this line more as a serving player to build into the midfield when the red win it. And then we have 2 counter goals, the blue team looking to advance and then score by playing into the counter goals. We do often put reference points in, so it wouldn't be uncommon for us to make a clear reference points for the players, because the objective isn't, the ultimate objective is, can we advance and score? That would be kind of the gold dust. But there's a lot of other sub goals and objectives in there that I think we need to celebrate in the building phase. At a very basic level, it could be anytime we can advance possession from back to middle third and secure possession. It could be a sub objective, and you should get praise for that. Anytime that we can advance back to middle and move the structure forward into this middle third or deeper middle third while we try and score goals, there is an advantage to that. And then some basic, let me rephrase that. Just some other basic objectives could simply be, when I'll give you an example. When our centre back has it, we have good width, we've stretched the opposition, and we're in a position where they're trying to press, and we have players showing up in behind and between 2 and finding ways of getting separated and facing forward. That in and of itself could be a player objective, an individual player objective, or 6, finding ways to move, to separate so that you can receive facing forward. While we might not eventually advance it towards goal, there's a number of opportunities in the training session to give your 6 praise, your 4 praise in terms of breaking lines at the right time, your 2 and your 3 praise in that they're stretching the opposition, which creates spaces between the structure of the opposition so that you can play forward. So while the overarching objective is, can we play through the thirds and eventually advance and score? That's very difficult to do. So building in sub-objectives that can be praised and are connected to main principles, sub-principles, and sub-sub-principles, I think is another way of reinforcing that you can make progress, even though we might not always put the ball on the back of the net.
Is your counter goals, or not really your counter goals, I guess you're working with the blue team. So the 2 small goals, you've kind of got them in the width of the PK box. Is that designed based on your game model as far as where your 7s and 11s might be within these phases, or is that for some other reason?
No, it's a good question. It's intentional. You can really only place the goals in a couple of different positions. So there's the choice of, I can place them here. And if I do that, every choice has a consequence, good or bad. The choice of putting the goals there for me is that we might end up in a phase where if the wide players for the opposition in the building phase, if we can circulate the ball quick enough out to a fullback, then I think it becomes a little too easy, and not really my intention from an objective perspective, too easy for me just to get facing forward and play in there. If that was the case and my goal was to advance back to middle in wide areas, i.e. I'm trying to go from central to wide and get into my 7 or 11, then that's probably a more appropriate placement for the goals if that's the objective. My initial objective was tied more to building back to middle third, and we're trying to play through the midfield, which is a more central objective because of the 6, 8, and 10 with the formation. So then we chose to bring those in here so that 1, we're looking to advance and play through lines, and 2, the consequence for the opposition is when that goal is there, it's very, very difficult for the red team to cover that space. So a couple of things will happen. They'll either start just defending here, just because they've now bought into the objective of don't let them score, but actually in trying to prevent the objective, they create too much space in here, which means it then becomes too easy for me to play through the middle of the field. And that's not really game-like, it's not really realistic. So the choice and planning of where you put your goals, that you have to, I think we have to give some thought to the consequence of where the goals go to not only the team building, but the opposition as well. So my choice, right, wrong, and indifferent, was to keep them more central in that the 6, 8, and 10, or the 4, 6, and 8 here, it's a little easier to cover this space, and it's a little more challenging for us to advance and score. So my hope is that the tension there is just right to make it more realistic.
Good deal. Yeah, and it does obviously make sense looking at your last activities, so if the 4 had a ball, there, they could have been one of the target players per se, playing into the 3v3 with the 2 goals being a moving target within your rondo from your second activity. So yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah.
Gareth, one of the sorry, go ahead, Sue.
No, Ross, you go.
Okay. One of the main objectives or main principles is trying to find those midfielders in a position that allows them to play forward, or getting them, receiving the ball facing the right way. Can you unpack that a bit for us in terms of, just finding ways to separate and facing forward? What kind of sort of details might you try and help the players with in those situations?
Yeah. The first thing I would look at is can we find the spare player, or the numerical advantage, if you will, the +1, we reference it. So the comment I would make to my back 4 in this situation is, you in theory have a 5v2 in the building phase. There's always an option there, if we have the right structure, to find one of our back 5 facing forward. And that's a key objective. Once we get into that position where we have one of the back line facing forward, then the next question is, how do we raise awareness to this group here? And this is just an example. Okay, you have a 3v2, which means you have a +1. What you're asking at a structural level is, how do you 2 here create enough tension that this 8 can do both jobs? If you both go and show up at the same place at the same time, the 8 can do both jobs. If the 6 shows up in behind and between 2, that's probably more realistic, and the 10 looks to play higher and pin, this 8 has to do a job. Either I go and close, or I have to drop off. But he can't do both, or she can't do both. That's assuming that my other midfield player doesn't get a little too antsy and start trying to get too close to the ball. One of the big challenges we have, I think, at most levels is our players try and help their teammates too much by going towards the ball as opposed to moving away from the ball. And that's in many cases a very counterintuitive action, because when the 8's peeling away, let's take this example here. When the 8 peels away, 1, I'm probably not going to see the ball. 2, I actually want to get on it, so that doesn't match up with my internal kind of mechanics. And then 3, I can't quite think about why that benefits me. So this player has to have a deeper appreciation for the game, that when they start peeling away and peeling away, they're creating a tension for these two players that I'm either going to have to stay or go. And whatever one you do, I should always have the +1 available. That's when this opens up. If this one bites here, then we skip the first receiving line and play into the second receiving line. And if for some odd reason the 6 shifts across, pins the 10, the 8 and the 6 show up here, and it's a 2v2, and this player's, let's just say, in behind a shadow, if you will, then in this situation, we have to respond. And we respond in one of two ways. This player here shows into a new space, trying to attract, so that this player can then show underneath, and then we find the other outlet. Or the other way is this 6 and 8. This player then has to go and make a choice, if they're good enough in tight spaces, to go and create that numerical advantage in here. And we then have to learn to play through, either through and bounce out, or we half turn. So that would be the structural answer, Ross, to your question in terms of number and structure. The next piece would be maybe tied into the sub principle level, at the player level. And I think at that one, we're basically asking our players, wherever you want the ball, you have to go away from that space first and then show up at the right time. So it's either a show and go or go and show. So this player here, if you want to pick it up in deeper pockets, you need to drift away until this player is ready, and you're reading body language to find the right moment to play. And your drifting draws, and at the right time as they draw, you then separate passes played. And ideally in that small window, you have enough time just to shape up and look to play forward. But we're talking about maybe a second. And if you don't get the timing right, you either get caught flat, showing up, facing your teammate, or you allow the defender to get close. And there's so many layers there: timing, angle of support, the preparation touch, awareness of pressure, the line that you show up, the quality of the entry ball. I mean, there's a lot of detail there depending on what the situation is.
Sue, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just kind of actually, Ross was going there with that basically, what kinds of problems do you anticipate in this? And you really answered that, because really this session is you laid out, is really about zone 2 and zone 3. This is not a building out of the back session, right? Mm-hmm. It's really about, it's really the second line that we're trying to break in a lot of ways. So a lot of this onus is going to be on your 6 there. So with that, so this doesn't turn into a building out of the back session. Is there any other ways that you would manipulate this session to bring out the problems that you want to see, like where you would restart balls, the starting positions of your 2 and 3? I think sometimes the 2 and 3 become a little bit elusive, what to do on that second or third pass. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll start with the kind of ball positioning, if you will. We'll identify specific areas. Sometimes it's, hey, we need to start the structure basically from a goal kick. Other times it's a throw-in, just regular play, if you will. We'll use regular restarts. Sometimes I will just give the ball straight to the red team, and so the red team will attack. And as they're attacking, it changes the structure of the blue team. I won't try and move all of them. What happens is the blue team then become very compact in terms of trying to defend the goal. And then we're looking at the building phase off the moment of transition. So how do we go from a transition phase of compact to then quickly positional structure, maximize space, and then positioning of players in behind and between, and then pass decision. So I will manipulate the starting point just to try and keep it as game-like as possible, but to present those different realistic pictures, Sue, in that regard. In terms of the fullbacks and midfielders, you probably then start getting into some form of rotation. So an example would be, sometimes it gets stagnant with your back 4, your two fullbacks caught on the touchline deeper. If you have a front 2, one example would be, okay, how do we advance in different areas of the field? So in this situation, if your 6 then drops in and you're building through your 6, Your 4 and 5 then can actually play a little bit higher and wider, which then bumps your 3 and your 2 a little bit higher, and then they have to make a choice. Stay compressed, in which case we then go around them. Again, I'm not moving all the little digits. Or if they go here, we're then looking to advance centrally. But just using the 6 to drop deeper bumps the 4 and 5, which then bumps the 2 and the 3, and it creates a numerical advantage in the next zone in different areas of the field. And that's when we would be looking to, they're usually going to get caught in this space. That's where we would look to advance and bounce out, and then take advantage of that advantage in wide areas as we build. The other one would be just the regular one where your 6 drops into the fullback position. So as you're building, let's say your 4's on it, they're getting pinned a little bit. Sometimes you'll see your 6 not only showing up here, but dropping into this space here, which bumps the 2. You then have this numerical advantage because 6 is there. Sometimes getting your 6 in different positions within the back line so that you can get that numerical advantage to face forward and then advance. But we're probably then getting into more player rotations and movement to get them more engaged.
You can connect it back to your phase 2 that you were just doing, where you're getting those decoy runs, because I think for stronger teams, you can get that 6 making that decoy run, right?
Yeah, and creating space for others. Yeah.
For for your 8 to drop into.
Yeah, and then we would, so we would be in this phase for, depending on the physical load or the objective for the day, we would be, it could be 3 times 6. So you got 18 to 22 minutes, including recovery, and you give a clear objective. In between, Ross, to your intervention piece, I'm an advocate of a whiteboard. I think our players are quite visual, or I've found my players to be visual. So in that 2.5 minute recovery, the blue team will just shuffle off to the side of the goal. I'll bring the whiteboard out, paint a couple of pictures. Okay, this is what I like. This is what I think needs to be polished. Get a question or 2 from the kids, put them back on the field, go after it for 6 minutes, and then work on obviously any rotations or managing the squad.
And then would you end your session here, or do you have like just more of a game, activity here?
Yeah, the last one's always contextual to the week, so I don't always finish every training session with a game. I don't always close my training with a game, because there's days where you have you play Thursday, Sunday, you're in there, you're painting some pictures, you show the kind of tactical movements, and then that's all they need. They don't actually need a game and a physical load. And so there are sometimes, depending on the physical load, we will manage that just to get the tactical picture. The second thing that I've done is sometimes I don't allow us to finish with a game, because the more you play all the time, you sometimes can lose a little bit of a buzz for that final game. So now and again, I will cut training knowing that the guys are itching to play, and I'll leave that itch for playing to the next training session or for the game coming up. So intentionally just pausing and not always finishing with a game, I think has, depending on your motive and objective, I think there's a benefit to it. In this regular training session, then we would move into, depending on the squad, it would be a 9v9 or an 8v8. You go, build your 3 lines, get the structure consistent with what you're using within the game. Obviously, the Blues are in a 4-3-3, but you would then pick a structure that mimics that with the number that you have. And then your field, wouldn't be uncommon for us to go 18 to 18, and then split the field into thirds as a reference point. And then the same principles are used 8v8, 9v9, 11v11. It wouldn't be uncommon for us to finish with that and see if we can make it happen with even numbers in a game-like situation.
Yeah. Hey, environmental management question. When you are using these reference points, if you're, depending on your environment, you're on turf, you could obviously put some of the, flat little cone things that don't move around. If you were a youth coach, maybe don't want to put, disc cones down and do that, would you advocate for maybe putting like coaching sticks or flags to just mark out the boundaries on the touch lines? Would that be enough for you, or do you want something physically on the field?
No, I try not to put stuff on the field. For me, if you have the nice coaching poles, I would go a yard outside the touchline on the outside of the right and left of the field. And then there's a reference point for the players to see, okay, am I advancing within this structure? You don't have those, a couple of cones on the outside on the line, just as a reference point. I think it's important, especially when you get into these smaller games, it's good for your players to know, did we advance the ball? Did we move it into the area that we wanted to move it? Am I showing up in the right areas? Because with those reference points, you then start to see what I would reference positional, a lack of positional discipline. People then just start running all over the place and playing at soccer, but not really getting structurally better or positionally improving. And yeah, I again, keep the context that I'm in. It's an 18 to 22-year-old, and we're trying to help them improve and grow and get better at an individual level. And we have guys playing at a pretty good level, some moving on to various professional levels. So we're really trying to polish up a phase in their development where running around and showing up in different spaces for the purpose of just playing, I think that's a lack of discipline in some ways at our level. Now, for a 7, 8, 9, 10, 12-year-old rotating positions, I think that's incredible. Give them access to that. But even in that, I think it's important that we give an element of reference point and structure. Because I see a lot of times at our level, there's a lot of players with huge desire, great work ethic, good ability, and they get confused because they're running all over the place and they attribute the work rate as, but I'm working really hard. Yeah, you're working really hard, but your measurable outcomes, they're almost non-existent. You're running in the wrong space at the wrong time, and that doesn't really help us. And if I can structure that energy and effort and application and willingness and get them to show up at the right time in the right areas, they're going to be exponentially more effective. And that's a difficult thing for us to adjust at our level because they're already 18, 19, 20. Last piece, because it isn't a physical issue, it's a cognitive processing issue. You have to get back in and rewire the way a player actually thinks and the impulses that trigger their ability to move. And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion at the youth level that shows up at the higher levels. So I'll pause there.
All right, so Gareth, masterclass Sesh today. Thanks for giving us your time. We appreciate you coming out. Can you tell the viewers where they can catch some of the Drake games online? Are you guys doing a lot on ESPN Plus still, or?
Yep, ESPN Plus, ESPN3. I would go to Drake Men's Soccer, click on the link right next to the schedule, and it should take you to the ESPN games this spring.
Awesome. And then Sue, Ross, as always, thanks for adding to the conversation. I appreciate you carving out some time for us today.
Always a pleasure to be here, Damien. That was a great episode. Lots of great insights and detail from Gareth. And really the big takeaway for me is just the amount of detail and thought going into the session prior to building the activities. Just in terms of the game moment, the physical load, the principles, the sub-principles, the sub-principles, all of that is thought about before even trying to figure out numbers and things like that. And I think that's just a huge takeaway for coaches, obviously for college coaches, but I think for coaches at all levels. And I see a lot of times youth coaches not considering the context and where they want to go before jumping in and starting to figure out numbers. And so I think that's a great takeaway from today's episode.
That was great, Gareth. I love that. And I liked a lot of the details that you gave us in the phase of play portion of the session. I'm going to go back and look at this because I think you gave us some concrete ideas of some kinds of movements that we need to see. And as you began the session, you said this is about how we're going to play through. So I thought that you stayed focused on that, and that was really helpful.
Well, listen, I appreciate the opportunity. Sue, Ross, Damien, doing incredible work. I think this is a really good platform. It's a privilege to be on the show in terms of going through that process. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. And Sue, Ross. It's a pleasure spending time with you. So thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Well, that's our effort this Friday for you, the viewers. On behalf of everyone here at the Cornfed Coaching FC family, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we wish you well.